Are expensive fragrances worth the money? Yes and no. So this question I've seen is kind of brought up a lot just throughout the internet. Some fragrances are really, really expensive. I've seen fragrances that are $200, $300, $400 or more, depending on where you're getting them. Are they actually worth the price? So the whole question of are they worth it kind of depends on what you're expecting and what you want from a fragrance. For example, the same question could kind of be asked about designer fragrances, like say Dior Homme. Dior Homme is a very popular men's fragrance, pretty fresh, clean, effective type of fragrance. It's almost $100. You could get a very similar fragrance for, $20, maybe a drugstore type of fragrance. How do you know what's worth it? So there are certain objective facts about expensive fragrances. Almost always, they are constructed at a better quality than cheaper fragrances. I've noticed this mostly in terms of longevity and projection. So one kind of example that I brought up a while ago actually is the comparison between Chanel No. 5 and a fragrance called Le Mans from Coty. And these are both made in the 1920s. I believe Chanel No. 5 came out in 1921 and Le Mans came out in 1927 or 25, I can't remember exactly. But Le Mans was created in response to Chanel No. 5, and in my opinion, they smell almost identical. Le Mans is a little less musky than Chanel No. 5, but very, very similar. Today, Le Mans is about $20 versus Chanel No. 5, which is about $90. They still smell very, very similar, but the difference is that Chanel No. 5 lasts quite a while. I would say 6 to 7 hours. Meanwhile, Le Mans lasts maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. Very poor longevity in comparison. So while you are getting a very similar scent, paying a little bit more will give you actually, more of a run for your money versus, you spend a little bit less, you're not going to get as much out of that fragrance. And that's just one kind of simple example of the difference between the quality when you pay a little bit more versus when you pay less for a certain fragrance. Now, this is not always the case. There are some very affordable fragrances that are super long lasting, but in general, that's usually how it works, because the more expensive fragrances are going to put a little bit more work into, or a lot more work into the development of their fragrances to make sure they smell good, they project well, they have good longevity. But again, this is not always the case, because I have come across pretty expensive fragrances that actually have horrible longevity, horrible projection. One example that I found is Voyage d'Hermès from Hermès, which is about a $90 fragrance, but it's super, super weak. It's a light type of fragrance. It's kind of oceanic, citrusy, green. But I find that longevity barely lasts an hour. Who wants to spend $90 for a fragrance that barely sticks around? So again, it really is dependent on the type of fragrance you're getting. Now, in terms of spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on certain fragrances, say Creed fragrances or Parfum de Marly, those two brands are known for producing extremely expensive fragrances, but also extremely high quality fragrances. Now, some of the fragrances that they make are indeed very, very high quality. They are very long lasting, they stick around, good projection, they smell really nice. Other ones are less popular. Like, I've heard a lot of controversy regarding Creed Aventus, which is a very expensive fragrance for men, kind of fresh and clean, and it's kind of gone down in quality a little bit, but actually gone up in price. And that's kind of the whole inflation problem that we're having right now, but that's just kind of one example of, if you spend $400 on a fragrance, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the greatest thing you've ever smelled. It also depends on your expectations of a fragrance. You can't expect to find just like the holy grail of fragrances because you spend a few $100s more on a fragrance. But then there's also the kind of question of the experience of the fragrance, the name brand, because a lot of people are actually really obsessed with the name. They have the Dior, they have the Chanel, the Parfum de Mali. They're really obsessed with the designer or the niche brand, and they just want that name, and they'll pay whatever to get that name, which is fine. But again, just because you're buying from a certain brand doesn't mean you're gonna get something that's above and beyond that you could get at a much cheaper price. And for the experience of the fragrance, maybe you really like the bottles that they come in, or the certain packaging that they have, opening up that package. It's more about the experience, and you like that, and you don't care about spending the extra money for it, then yeah, that will be more worth it for you. But if you just want a fragrance that smells good and you don't really care about anything else, you obviously don't need to spend a ton of money on a fragrance. A lot of my personal favorite fragrances are actually relatively affordable. Like, I always bring up Youth Dew by Estee Lauder, which is about a $30-ish fragrance, which lasts forever, like 9 hours, and that sort of thing. And just a nice kind of spicy type of fragrance. Meanwhile, there are other fragrances that I also enjoy that are way more expensive. Like, I really enjoy Pegasus from Parfum de Mali. Kind of has a nice almond smell to it, and that's like $300-400. So it really depends on your preferences, your expectations, why you want a particular fragrance, and all that. Because determining what makes a fragrance worth the money is kind of a combination of all of those factors. Like, for me, I would probably never spend $400 or $500 on a fragrance. I don't care what they put in it, it's not going to be worth it for me. But maybe a $90 fragrance, because I always figure that $90 is kind of the go-to mark for a lot of designer fragrances. Niche fragrances tend to be more expensive, but once you go above $90, how much more is it going to improve? Is it really going to be that much better if I spend $200 versus $100 on a fragrance? So that's just kind of the thing that goes through my mind. But again, it's a very kind of personal decision for how much to spend on a fragrance, and is it worth it? How does it smell? That sort of thing. So that's pretty much my main points for this video. Again, there's no real right answer to whether it's worth it or not to buy expensive fragrances. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, depending on the person and what's going on. But hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, of course, you could leave a like, maybe subscribe, and I make videos throughout the week, so stick around for those.